This is Semi-Pro, and my guest for this inaugural episode of my interview show is none other than DAVEY, a journeyman throughout NA Counter-Strike. Before COVID, he was on the analysis desks for things like ESL Pro League Season 10. You might recognize him from that. You might also recognize him from his post-COVID occupation as an occasional streamer. What's going on, man?
Hey, how's it going? No, nothing's going on. You know, like you said, occasional streamer. Yeah. That's about it. Yeah. Occasional podcast host, occasional streamer, soon to be occasional YouTuber.
Oh, there you go.
Whatever. Yeah. We hired a new editor over at Peaker's Advantage, like an actual YouTube video guy. And he's great. So I need to work with him and actually pump out some content. And that's about it.
Sounds like things are rocking and rolling then. I was going to ask you how you're doing in 2020. I mean, you ready for it to be over yet, or what's going on there?
I don't. Dates. What time is? I'm just so tired. Right. Relative. Time is relative.
Of course.
So 2020. Yeah. Well, for all we know, it could be 40-20. Who knows?
For 2020. So
there you go.
At the start of this interview, I should mention the latest Peaker's Advantage we did was actually with Laser Lips, none other than good old Marty. Now, he actually gave me a lot of useful context for setting up this show, because one of the things that we discussed there was the health of the scene overall, and I think we briefly glanced on the Players Association. Obviously, that'll be a major focus of this particular show. We are not going to glance by it over here. We're not going to sweep anything under the rug. We'll primarily be talking about them and maybe how they can improve, how the scene itself could improve. So my opening question for you is, what actually should be the function or the focus of a player union or a similar organization in the esports space?
Well, I guess that's kind of tough because we have no precedent anywhere else. People try to make the argument, oh, it's just like the UFC or it's just like the tennis. It's just like, no, it's not. It isn't. It's not like tennis or it's not like UFC. We have no precedent for what this union is supposed to be. So I think that what should the union be trying to do is taking care of players in all aspects of their career. It should be what they're trying to do, whatever that may be, whether it's making events more comfortable for players, whether it's making sure that players aren't getting young players aren't getting scammed by by orgs, making them sign terrible contracts, or just basic things like that. Just like giving them. I don't think that the player union themselves, the people who are in charge of it, should be giving contract advice or anything like that to players, but they should be able to connect them to other players, right? Like you can say, if you're, let's say, if you're management of the player union and some young player who is about to sign with insert X shady org here, and you can say, hey, I want you to take a look at this contract. Then they should be able to say, I can put you in contact with a couple player reps who are currently playing that can help you with that. Here's their contact information. Here you go, and you can contact them and talk about that. Just basic things like that, just to make sure that young guys aren't getting screwed. We should also be working on actually securing the jobs for these players instead of actively working against players making jobs. Like I think they need to define exactly what they are, because right now it's the Counter-Strike Professional Players Association, and any professional player falls under that association, yet they're not representing all of the players in the association. They're only representing the top players in the association. So I just think that they need to be more honest about who they're representing and the things that they're actually doing, and really make sure that they're actually doing what they're saying they're doing, instead of just saying nice things and then not doing it.
Well, that leads into my second question, which was, of course, is that the focus of the CSPPA in your opinion? But apparently you have some contrary opinion. So what do you think then, based on what we've actually seen the CSPPA? I mean, they were founded 2 years ago now in the middle of 2018, I think around August. So we've had some time to see their track record. What do you think they've actually been focusing on, in your opinion? Has it been actually some more business-sided things? Has it been anything related to actual player concerns? Or do you have any information based on your contacts in the scene?
Not based on any contacts or anything, but I do think that early on, their main focus was making the quality of tournaments better. I think that was their main focus early on, was we need to make sure that there's practice PCs. We need to make sure that there's no ridiculous travel times. There's no, just the basic quality of life things, I think, was their main focus at the beginning. And they got all of that sorted out for the most part. Any tier 1 event right now has anything a player has nothing to complain about at a tier 1 event these days. They have the best PCs, they have practice rooms, they all have their own hotel rooms. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing for tier 1 players to complain about at any tier 1 event anymore. There just isn't. That it's the events now are run so flawlessly compared to how they used to be. And I think that's one thing the player union did super well, or player association did super well, was making sure that the top events are actually run super smoothly. I think once they sort of handled that, it was almost like, oh, we did it. Fuck yeah, guys. Like, fuck, great job, everybody. You know, like, we did it. Like, this is great. Now what? And then they just started like working towards their whatever met their own goals, right? So the people who were, the board, or like, the players who got appointed, not voted in, appointed by the people who founded the union, right? CEO Mads Olin, somebody else. I'm sorry if I got names wrong or don't remember people. It's whatever.
Yeah, it's fine.
But the people who founded it, the actual like management, the Danish lawyers who actually started it, they and whatever their jobs are, they're just appointed players based on their current standing in the scene. So, for example, your Tacos, your Terex, your Zipex, your nothing, right? These guys just got appointed by them. And at the time, that made total sense, right? You just need to appoint players who know what they're doing. Let's work out all the initial things. Made sense at the time. Then once you start saying things like, this is meant to represent all professional Counter-Strike players. This is anybody who's a professional Counter-Strike player can, fill out a form and you're in the player association and we will represent you. Once you start telling people that, you actually have to kind of do that. You can't just like say it and then they're in and then never speak to them ever and don't represent them at all and not do anything. Like, there's just don't do it then. Just don't say that you're representing them and then not actually represent them ever. That just seems very dishonest to me.
Now, some people might not actually be aware that what it sounds like you're alluding to is some comments that you made on the No Flashpoint Club over on Richard Lewis's stream about 3 months ago. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you had never been in contact with or approached by anybody from the CSPPA. Can you sort of restate some of that? I do also remember that apparently about a month ago, you had a tweet that went out, something to the effect of that you had actually talked to several players, both in Tier 3, Tier 2, but also some Tier 1 teams that also had received similar treatment. And so clearly it's not just a problem with the lower tiers of Counter-Strike if it's also happening in Tier 1. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
Well, just that they never reached out, so the original comment made very originally was, I had never been asked to vote on anything. I was in the CSPPA since it was created, and I was never emailed once saying, hey, how do you feel about this issue? Here, do you want to vote on this? Do you want to vote in like a player representative to represent you? I was never asked to vote on anything. It was just, I'm in, and now you're being told what they're doing. Right. And I was like, well, this doesn't operate how a union is supposed to operate at all. Mm-hmm. And, personally, I come from a very blue collar area. I'm very familiar with unions, and everybody who I went to school with are all in unions, working at factories, working at this. Everybody, like, it's all very blue collar where I live. So I'm very familiar with how unions are supposed to operate, and how this is operating is not like a union, and that's fine, because it's also, like I was saying earlier, there's no precedent for how they're supposed to operate and what they're supposed to do. So I understand it's a really difficult thing to do, right? To run a union or a players association representing all different players, all different ages, from all different countries and continents in the world. That's like an impossible task. So why they claim to be doing that seems ridiculous, because it's not really possible to do that. So I don't hold it against them that they're not able to do it. I just think they should be more honest about what they're actually doing, instead of pretending that they're representing all of these people when they're not.
Gotcha. Now, the CSPPA itself seems to have had its reputation more or less dragged through the mud in the court of public opinion. I mean, I've seen plenty of comments and Reddit threads and Reddit comments, and we all know that you got to hold that with a sort of a pinch of salt, because you're not sure how representative it is of the wider audience. But I have sort of reckon that most of the people in the audience who are just casual viewers who don't consume content like this, who don't consume content like By the Numbers, for example, probably aren't even aware that maybe there is a CSPPA. Maybe that's completely over their head. So the people who are aware do seem to be aligned against the CSPPA itself. But has that same sort of notion, that same sort of feeling, been echoed in the sentiments of the actual players that are associated with it? Do you think that the players that are currently in the CSPPA actually see value in it? Do they see it as an asset right now in the current landscape?
Yeah, I think most players do. They just see it. Well, so I guess it depends. So most tier 1 players do, for sure. Most of them do. Any of them ones I have talked to do. Once you start getting lower down, it's not that they think it's bad or they think it's good. They just think it's like, there it is. Like, it's just something that exists. Like, we don't know. We know that's like, oh, so what do you think of the CSPPA? I don't know. Are you in it? Yeah, I filled out the form. Okay, like that's it. That's the extent of their experience with the CSPPA, right? It's, yeah, I'm in it. I filled out the form. What do you think about it? I don't know. I haven't talked to them. None of their decisions have affected me, right? Because the only players who are obviously hard done by it are the ones who lost all their pro league jobs when the CSPPA agreed to cut 30% of the teams from the pro league across the world, and then all of a sudden overnight 60 players lost their jobs, right? So those would be the ones who obviously weren't a huge fan. They were the ones who were affected by it. But for the players who are just tier 3 MDL players who are in the Players Association, they're just completely disconnected from it. Even though they're technically in it, they've never had any contact with them at all.
It's also been intimated, I think, by some content creators in the space that the CSPPA may have gone forward with its early movements in the early stages of its creation to do things like improve tournament conditions, as you mentioned at the top of the show, and maybe in a way, intentionally or otherwise, have essentially pacified some of the more vocal tier 1 pros because they've been taken care of in some capacity, and now there's not nearly as much to complain about, like you said. Do you think that this is something that's in reality? I mean, obviously the joke is Taco just is now at this point saying, oh, maybe they can allow hats in or something. Like the whole idea is that the pros maybe are concerned now with pushing trivial or just less consequential changes to the way that the current landscape exists, as opposed to more structural and important change that would affect all pros, not just the tier 1s. Is that something that you think you've observed?
Yeah, I think definitely, probably a little bit. I think that the biggest thing right now is that because of everybody's fighting for exclusivity, right? All the big tournament organizers, behind the scenes, they all want to be the league, right? There's this Flashpoint versus Blast versus this ESL thing going on. Valve doesn't seem to have any interest in stepping in and moderating, so it's a fucking free for all as always, right? So at that point, it becomes the biggest deciding factor is going to be the players union, right? Because all of them need the players association on their side. So the players association has all of these TOs by the fucking balls, because if you don't give them exactly what they want, then they will say, nope, our players aren't playing in that, right? Well, maybe they won't. Like, I don't pretend to know what's going on in their board meetings or anything, but I'm saying there's the potential that they could say, if you don't meet these standards, which are fucking ridiculous potentially, then we're not going to play in your league because this league is offering us this. So then all of a sudden now you have these leagues who are just completely, the TOs are just, the CSPPA has them by the balls, which isn't necessarily a bad thing from a player perspective, right? You want to make sure you get the best possible thing you can get, but for the overall scene, it might not be the best. But, also at the same time, as a players association, that is your job, is to only look out for the players. Your job isn't to look out for the TOs, right? You're not supposed to be looking out for the TOs if you're the players association. So for overall scene health, I can't see a world where it's a net positive unless Valve steps in and moderates some shit. But for like we're talking about, for tier 1 players, this is only going to get better and better for them.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier is that you're very familiar with how unions work. So you are, of course, familiar with then collective bargaining, the idea that players can withhold their participation. Well, workers, more broadly speaking, can withhold their participation at their workplace in order for some improvement in working conditions. Is that something that the CSPPA has ever even threatened, to your knowledge, or do they even seem to have the power? It does seem.
I don't see how they could have the power to do it. Mm-hmm. I just don't see how they could. Like we were talking about, for the tier 1 teams, they could. Right, for the big teams who are all very involved in it, they could be the ones who say, for example, this is a perfect example right now because of what's going on with this Blast partnership with Neom, right? This is the exact time where the Players Association should be coming out and saying, our teams will not participate in Blast events as long as this partnership continues, right? As long as the partnership with Blast and Neom continues, no CSPPA designated team will be participating in their events. That would be what the CSPPA should be doing right now. That is a stand they should be taking. All the teams so this is exactly when, at this time, if this was a functioning union / players association, whatever it is, that the CSPPA board people would send out an email to all of their their representatives, which they now claim they have 51 player representatives from all the teams. Apparently they have now. I've spoken to many teams who still have no clue what they're talking about, but that's fine. They say they have them. So we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe some people in teams just aren't involved. And even though one guy is representing them, I don't fucking know. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt that what he said on Twitter, that they have 51 player reps that have been voted by their teammates, which is what he said on Twitter, is real. If that's the case, then they should all be contacting them right now and saying, hey, we want to make this stand. All of you vote on it. Everybody, all of those player reps, cast your vote. Yes, we stand with this, or no, we don't. Right? Yes, we stand that we won't play Blast, or no, we won't. And once that vote comes in as a unanimous fucking yes, because if it doesn't, that's pathetic, then they should come out with their announcement, their statement saying, we will not be participating. No, the CSPPA teams have voted and agreed that we will not be participating in any Blast events as long as the Neon partnership continues. And that is how they're going to make a fucking stand against this shit. I see a lot of the broadcast talent is coming out saying they're not going to participate. The teams need to come out and say they're not going to participate. And this is something that the CSPPA could do that would look fucking really good for them, and it's super fucking easy to do, guys, and it would look really good for them, and they could come out and they could do it and actually do the right thing, and that would be a really smart move for them. I don't remember what the original question was, but somehow I got there.
You did. The original question was whether or not they even would do it or could potentially do it. Obviously, you said it's very easy to do and orchestrate among tier 1 pros. But this is where the counter argument would be that maybe, I mean, obviously the Neon example is very extreme because of all the human rights violations that are happening. But if you look at something more tame, perhaps like maybe ESL Pro League saying that they are not going to agree to the CSPPA standards, and then maybe the tier 1 teams do get pulled out in some capacity. But even though the CSPPA technically represents tier 2 and tier 3 pros, what is necessarily stopping them, or what is allowing them to enforce the idea that nobody from their organization, represented by their organization, would actually go there? If tier 2 pros might just be like, well, this is my chance to get on some screen that somebody will watch and get some representation and maybe win some money depending on the prize pool, especially since all the tier 1 pros just left. All the tier 1 teams just pulled out of the event. So why can't I just step in, at that point? What is stopping the CSPPA from, or what would facilitate that if there is anything? And if not, like, why even claim that they have the ability to do that, or seemingly threaten that they have the ability to pull out and do that collective bargaining? I mean, if they don't have collective bargaining capacity, is it even a union, or is it even an association? As I suppose.
I mean, personally, I don't think it is, because I don't think they do. But if they've made the changes that they claim to have made, with all these player reps, then in that case, they would theoretically have the power to do that. I've yet to see it. I've yet to see any proof of that. So withholding judgment on that one. But I think up until the supposed new announcement thing, I would say no, they wouldn't have any power to do that. Even now, it would be, how are you, because those tier 2 players, they don't get anything from the Players Association. How are you going to tell them, no, you need to stop making your living because we have decided we don't agree with them because they didn't offer to give our standards are this, and they didn't meet these 3 criteria that are negligible to a tier 2 team. It's just like, this doesn't matter to us. We just want to go play. To a tier 1 team, it's these tiny little quality of life things, but to a tier 2 team, they're like, no, we just need to go play and participate because this is our job and we need to make a living. And I think that without consulting all of those teams on what the original standards are, which I'm sure they don't, 100% sure they don't, then that would be, how could you tell them that they couldn't go and work and make their living? That would be working against what you are supposed to be doing. So it's like, it's a catch-22. It's super, I guess it's kind of an oxymoron. It's like it works against itself in that sense. So I don't see how they could do that.
Another potential issue with the CSPPA that I personally have observed, and maybe you can either allay my concerns or explain why they're a bit more valid, is the potential for conflict of interest, not only with the organization itself, but with the fact that some of these high-profile player reps that are in there as board members are potentially competing against each other in the pro circuit, as opposing team members, as members of opposing teams, rather. So is that something that has come up before? I mean, obviously, like you said, there's not really much of a precedent for a union or an association in esports. There are, of course, sports-based ones. Are you familiar with how they've resolved that potential issue where somebody might decide to, veto a certain vote based on the fact that it may give them a competitive advantage or may put one of their opponents, their competitors, at a disadvantage?
I mean, to me, it's pretty straightforward. You can have team reps, right? You have one player from each team that represents each team, and that's obviously necessary and fine. As far as a board goes, no active playing member should ever be on the board. That's making decisions. It just shouldn't be for that exact reason you said. Why? I know people in the scene have brought this up before. Why would Zipex, Taco, and I'm just throwing out names. Insert any current active playing board member. I'm not trying to throw those guys under the bus, but hypothetically, why would they want to speak up and try to get what's that Finnish kid's name unbanned?
Alexi B? Or no?
No.
Alexi B.
I don't know. The guy who's I'm just too stupid. I can't remember. I'm too tired right now. My brain doesn't work. This is pretty brutal for us.
Jumpy. That's him.
Yeah, Yampi. Yeah. Why would they want to strengthen their competitor, right? Even if consciously they think that they're a good person and want to make the right decisions, at the very least, at the very least, subconsciously, the competitor in you is you're gonna try to find reasons why what happened is okay. It's like, look, Valve always has this stance. Permabans are permabans. They always have this stance, guys. It's not worth fighting Valve on it. We need to fight Valve on more important things, right? We need to fight Valve on more important things that we can actually accomplish. This is something. Look, they haven't even unbanned the iBuyPower guys. Come on, like we don't need to fight them on that. It's like it's not about that, right? And I'm not saying that's what they were thinking, but obviously this is hypothetical, and so I think that having the fact that it's like you said, it's just like any conflict of interest. It doesn't matter if it's actively happening or if it could potentially happen. As long as the only thing that matters is that if there is a potential for that to happen, then you need to just eliminate that potential. That you need to do everything in your power to eliminate that potential. And it's pretty easy. There's a lot of retired Counter-Strike players at this point. There's a lot of ex-professional Counter-Strike players who would be willing to help out and be on the board. So there's just no reason for any active players to be on the board making decisions like that when they're, like you said, they're affecting their own teams and their competitors.
Another potential conflict of interest that you pointed out on Twitter, I think about a month ago, was the fact that the CSPPA is actually taking money from the TOs, which in theory, these tournament organizers are putting on tournaments that may not satisfy the requirements or the demands of the CSPPA, and therein lies an obvious conflict of interest, because if the CSPPA doesn't send the teams over, they're probably not going to get the money that they're supposed to be getting from the TOs. Can you explain this a little bit for the layman who wasn't following it at the time, and maybe why it's pretty obvious, but why it's an actual conflict of interest in this case? Sure.
So I think that if you're the CSPPA, right, and I think when I was talking to the CEO on Twitter, he said, this is a collective bargaining agreement. They pay us money and blah, blah, blah. Right. And then we're supposed to, and then we work with each other. Well, the problem is that the CSPPA, by being a member of the CSPPA, you don't actually pay into it like you do with a normal union, right? With a normal union, you pay a percentage of your paycheck every month, and then you're in the union, right? With the CSPPA, players don't do that. So at least not tier 2, tier 3 players, right? None of them do. As far as tier 1 players, I'm not actually sure if the guys on the board pay in, for example. But to my knowledge, no, they don't. To my knowledge, and that might be wrong. So if that's wrong, the CSPPA guys can feel free to correct me on that one. So that means that the funding for the CSPPA is coming from third-party sources, right? Like the TOs, things like that. So when the funding for your organization, your association, is dependent on a tournament organizer like Flashpoint, because this is the one we were talking about specifically, and they had this this disagreement over if they were going to get paid, why they weren't getting paid, all these things that were going on. If Flashpoint is funding the CSPPA's operations, and Flashpoint is a league that is owned by the teams, the employers of the players, that means that the people who employ the players are funding the union that's supposed to be representing the players. What the fuck? That obviously cannot happen for so many reasons. That is not okay, and it sucks that Flashpoint happens to be owned by all the teams. But in the same way, you just can't. You can't have that. You cannot have the people who are employing the players also be the ones who are funding their union. That's like Riot Games Players Union, same fucking shit. Obviously not exactly the same, but you get it. You get it. It's bad. It's not a good thing, and that needs to be shut down. They need to find other ways. They should be taking percentages of players' wages every month for people who want to be in the union and who are involved, and then those people should be voting on their reps for their teams, and the team reps should be talking to the unions and blah blah, blah, etc. There should be an actual players association is what it should be. So yeah, no, cannot be funded by the teams.
I think we should mention briefly that the reason why we keep making distinctions between union and association is actually there is a legal term or definition for union, and the CSPPA does not meet it, which is why it's not called the CSPPU. Right. It's called the CSPPA.
Because obviously it's worldwide. So because they represent players on all different continents, they can't just like be an American union, right? That wouldn't make any sense.
Right, just for the layman. So are you actually familiar with the League of Legends or Overwatch player associations or any associations from other games?
The League of Legends Association, the Player Association, I'm not super familiar with it, but I am familiar with it. Overwatch, no fucking clue.
How do you feel that the League of Legends one stacks up against the CSPPA? Is it
CSPPA is better. Okay. No, so CSPPA is definitely better than that one, because that one is like 3 of the 5 members of the board all play for one team, and the entire thing is funded by Riot, and those players who are involved there, like it's all just a meme. It's a meme and a joke amongst the professional League of Legends players. Like their union is, even amongst the tier 1 players, it's a joke. At least CSPPA is doing a pretty good job of representing the tier 1 players right now. So it's definitely better than the Riot one, that's for sure.
Is there potential? I should go on the record and say I don't believe that there is personally, but is there potential in your mind for a more organized and like developer focus? You spoke earlier, Valve's intervening potentially for at least with regards to the leagues and trying to moderate stuff. Is there potential for development or game developer influence or intervention in the scene that would benefit things, not directly through controlling a union or an association, but something to that effect that would potentially resolve some of the issues that we're seeing now? Potential,
yes.
Likelihood,
no.
Put it another way. Is there some way that, like, what would, if you were able to influence Valve's actions in the current scene, given our current situation in Counter-Strike, would that be something that would there be a certain set of decisions that you would want to make or think may help the situation?
Yeah, I think Valve just needs to come in and moderate the calendar. They need to stop forcing TOs to fight against each other for calendar time and for event time. Valve just needs to do kind of what they're doing with the RMR right now, actually. Like they're kind of like low-key doing it by just giving RMR events to different TOs and saying, all right, so this TO is running this RMR for these 2-week period. That means no other tournaments can go on during that time. Well, no tier 1 tournaments can go on during that time, right? Because RMR is going on those weeks, which is the major cycle. So Valve's kind of low-key doing it. I think that the best thing for Valve to do would be to come in and set the calendar, kind of much like the PGA Tour. People always like to reference things back to pro sports, right? So let's do that. Much like the PGA Tour, where this is this event's block. This is your weekend. Make it work. Go, right? That would be, I think, the best way for Valve to do things, where at the beginning of the year, or maybe 1 year in advance, they tell all these tournament organizers, this is your set, these are your dates. Everybody gets fucking equal dates. You know, I know that's not the most capitalist thing ever, and generally I tend, whatever, I'm not going to get political, but it just fucking makes sense for Valve to just do that. Whether it's just the big guys, whether it's everybody, they need to make the RMR system a lot more specific, a lot more throughout the whole year. Everything is planned out for the whole year at the beginning of the year, or even the year before. Like 6 months left in 2020. Like, let's say right now, Valve announces the 2021 calendar. Bang! Everybody knows this is the player break. These are the events. This is the major. This is this. Obviously, COVID fucks everything up a little bit, but without COVID, let's say, they need to be able to just do that and set dates for each TO. I think that would be the best thing Valve could do. Not even getting involved with player union shit, because I don't want Valve involved with player union shit. Although, admittedly, Valve has a really good track record with player rights and making sure players don't get fucked. Valve does have a really good track record with that. Just on principle, I just don't want them involved in player association shit.
Right, goes back to the point earlier about if there's a potential for a conflict of interest, we should make sure to minimize it. So when it comes to Valve's potential influence, would this be something regarding the calendar that you would have to bring on representatives or some sort of interested party who works a little bit closer with the scene? Because, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, especially not the professional players that are playing in these RMR events, but it does seem like it's been a bit of a shit show with regards to the rules. I mean, losing a huge amount of points depending on player changes when it's like a 6-month span of time or something crazy. You're not normally expected to keep the same roster for that amount of time, particularly since the scheduling issues from COVID have cropped up and sort of aggravated that. So would there be a particular candidate in mind, or what would the qualities of such a candidate actually be if they were supposed to head this sort of thing? Like, how would they have to approach an option like controlling the calendar?
I think that you definitely just a point, Semphis. Just let Corey do it. Corey will just do everything. He's fine. But I think that with the calendar, I think that Valve, in classic Valve fashion, they sort of have the right idea for where they should be going, and they just execute really poorly for the first year or two, right? That's sort of classic Valve, where it's like, we have a pretty good idea here. Let's do it really shitty for the first little bit, and then when we fix everything, they'll fucking love us. So that's sort of Valve fashion. Like you said, RMR is kind of a shit show right now. Rules make no sense. Fucking letting Gaming play against MIBR, even though they say there's no team conflict of interest allowed, and then the people who own Gaming are beating Gaming in a qualifier to qualify for the major. It's like, well, like this is classic Valve, but slowly they tend to just sort of get there. Slowly, eventually they sort of get there. So I think definitely, well, in an ideal world, they could work with the CSPPA, right? Which I know they do. So the fact that all these rules are in place are super weird to begin with. Obviously, either the CSPPA has no fucking clue what they're doing, which I don't actually think is completely true. But I think that Valve don't give a fuck what the CSPPA has to say about most things. Certain things they definitely do, as far as actual player rights go. But for Valve's like tournament rules and major rules, they're just like, yeah, no, we're gonna do this how we want to do it. This is our thing. Just stay in your corner. That's what I have a feeling. That's the feeling I have that those conversations went, anyways.
Well, the CSPPA definitely seems to be kind of toothless in that regard. And insofar as I don't actually know how they would do a collective bargaining agreement against Valve. Against tournament organizers, it makes sense. But what are you going to do, not play the game ever? I mean, I don't see that working for a very long period of time, that's for sure.
No, I don't think so either. It would be hard. It would be really hard to do. Like I said, it's almost impossible. Their job is almost impossible. I hope that when we actually get to talk to the CSPPA guys that they are a bit more honest and a bit more upfront, because I just think what they're claiming they're trying to do, I don't think it's even possible to do it. So I don't know why they keep it's almost like they're overselling themselves. And I think that hopefully we can get some more clarity on what their actual operations are.
I wanted to talk a bit about PR, actually, because, I mean, obviously public relations in the context of the CSPPA has not been great. We talked earlier about how their reputation doesn't seem to be particularly...
Now, that's what they need to hire Corey for.
Well, Corey, he can carry the whole organization.
He can carry the whole thing. Look, Corey doesn't have lies in him, Like, he has no interest in lying to people about shit, right? So if they ask Corey... why did you drop this deal with Flashpoint, or why is Flashpoint, why are they refusing to pay you? No, it's just a bunch of fucking pussies, man. Like they wanted to have us test the monitors, and I didn't fucking read the email. Like, my bad. I forgot to read the email about us testing the monitors, so I didn't see it. And then they're like fucking freaking out on me and shit. Like, what the fuck, man? Like that would be what Corey would say on Twitter, and everyone would be like, you know what? Not bad. We'll take it. At least he's being honest.
Would be an upgrade in that sense, for sure. Because one of the things about that particular point, or that particular event, was that apparently, we don't really have full transparency, only what we've heard from By the Numbers, from Thorin on By the Numbers. But it definitely seems like they simply dropped some sort of deal based on Flashpoint trying to make the right step and contact the Players Association and say, hey, we're looking for this sponsorship. Can you guys test these monitors? And
I feel like that's part of the thing that I was talking about earlier. It's like, how is the CSPPA supposed to organize shipping monitors all around the world to different players?
Right.
How are they supposed to organize that?
In an online world as well, especially.
Exactly. Like, how are they supposed to organize that? That's like out of they're trying to do the right things. Like, we want to test all the monitors before we play an event. It's like, okay, that's fair. That's reasonable. You don't want shit monitor. I've been at events that have shit monitors, really fucking annoying, for sure. So I get that. And then it's like, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, you can test all of them. fuck, how do we do this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like now all of a sudden, how are we supposed to ship monitors all around the world? Because then it becomes a thing. Is every player going to test this? Every player playing in the league, are they going to test it? Are just each team reps going to test this? You didn't have team reps at the time, so that's not possible. Team reps couldn't have tested it. So what are you going to do? Just send it to all the Danish guys, and all the Danish guys just test it and say, yeah, this is fine. Meanwhile, all the American teams fucking hate it. And then what do? You know what I mean? It's such a, how are they even supposed to do that? So I feel like they kind of realized that, and instead of just being like, yeah, no, actually, we're not capable of pulling that off, they just kind of like just sort of bitched out and just like ghosted them. You know what I mean? That's what it seemed like happened anyways. Of course, I'm reading through the lines. I don't have any actual info on this. It just seems like they realized it was not a feasible task and just decided to sort of ghost their way out of it.
Before we move on from the topic of the CSPPA and the potential shit show that is the scene, I wanted to ask if you had any sort of ideas for maybe a path to improvement, either for the CSPPA themselves or for like maybe some action that the average esports viewer could actually do to maybe influence change in a more positive direction when it comes to this sort of professional scene.
Yeah, I think holding people accountable is important, and we've had a lot of holding people accountable lately in esports across the board, which is a good thing. Don't get me wrong. I think it's also really important that if you hold somebody accountable and they apologize and work towards fixing that, you then have to then forgive them and give them actual credit. So like, for example, with this Blast thing we were talking about earlier, if everybody hops on Blast for this Neon sponsorship, right? And everybody hops on them, and then Blast comes out, even though they've taken a really long time. But let's say in two or 3 days from now, even though it's super late and they obviously didn't care about this before, but now they do because all of a sudden everybody else cares. That's standard business. That's fine. If they now decide to cancel this partnership because of what everybody's saying, then people need to stop jumping on their backs for it. And now it becomes, good job, Blast. Thank you, Blast. You did great. We'll now watch your events again. You know, you have to actually encourage the positive behavior and not just attack them for the negative behavior, right? So even though, yes, they shouldn't have signed this to begin with, because obviously it's about practicality at this point, instead of, you know, just being upset. Still, you have to, after that, you have to then encourage the positive behavior. So I think that is important and something that people on the internet aren't the best at. So I think that, you know, that's generally for general scene improvement. I think that's a good thing. If people are trying to fix mistakes they've made or change their ways, change how they are as a person because what they were doing before was bad, whether it's tournament organizers, CSPPA, players themselves, whatever it is, encourage the positive behavior. Don't just hate somebody for something bad that they've done or a bad decision a TO made with a terrible sponsor that doesn't like gay people.
And we'll leave it there. So you've worked your way up to the big leagues as an analyst, right? At this point, you've already appeared at the ESL Pro League Season 10, as I mentioned at the top of the interview. I wanted to mention, or just ask you a little bit, because I don't actually remember too many anecdotes that you shared on either the Peakers Advantage podcast or any other podcast appearances that you've had recently about how that event stacked up. I'm always interested in hearing how former players, when they try out the analyst or on-air talent roles for the first time, how they see the event from a different angle. Could you share a little bit about how that event ended up playing out? For just to jog your memory, this was the America's Facing event, had MIBR, Evil Geniuses, Team Liquid, and Sharks make it out of their groups. And then the event itself was won by Mouse Sports in a 3-0 over Fnatic. I don't know if that helps jog your memory a little bit. I know it's been a while.
Yeah, and I struggle in general with memory. So, I'm not. So, are you talking about how the event shaped up, like from the team's perspective, like just looking at the event from the outside, or how did it like shape up, like for me working as an analyst
specifically? Like how was it? You know, I don't know if that was your first major event as an analyst, but.
I think the very first one I worked sort of came last minute. Joe Miller, the head of talent for ESL, he reached out to me and said, because I had sent him a message, a couple months prior saying, hey, just so you know, like I'm stopped playing now. I have these, these injuries that I have, I can't play anymore. So I want to, I've always wanted to work on the desk as a commentator, but I think, right now my skill set would be best suited to being an analyst, and I want to do that for a few years. So if you have any events, if you need anybody, just hit me up and I can make myself available whenever, right? Because living that retired life, so I didn't have anything going on, and I was just streaming full time at the time, just to to fill my days. And then he sends me a message like, "Hey, we had somebody pull out last minute. Can you fly out to LA in like 2 days?" And I was like, "Yep." Absolutely. So that was the first one I did where I was doing Group D of the first stage, and it was all the South American teams. And to be honest, it was really terrible quality Counter-Strike. But that worked out really well for me because I learned so much in those first few days. About camera presence. Even right now, like you can't really. I don't know if you can see it. Well, obviously you can't see it, but I don't know if you can tell. But like my legs are just shaking back and forth. Like I'm like my knees are just going back and forth. I'm always sort of like twitching and moving. When I used to stand on camera for interviews, I would move around like this. I'm sure this is terrible for the people listening. The audio, I'm sure, was awful right there, but I would move my head around a lot. I would be swaying. I would, so things like that. I wouldn't know what to do with my hands. I remember, my ex-girlfriend at the time was there with me for even the stage 2, and I was still doing things. I was like talking, I would be moving my hands everywhere and like doing all these things with my hands, and she was just like, you're moving your hands too much. It looks ridiculous. Stop moving your hands around, right? And so just little things like that you don't really think about play into it. And I also realized the first time I was there, I was so worried about making a mistake. I was so worried about dead air. I was so worried about just standing there and not having anything to say. So I was doing a lot of and it sounds terrible and it's not good for the broadcast. And hopefully now, obviously those things slip in a little bit here and there, but I'm sure as you can tell throughout this, I think I've gotten a lot better at that even over the past year for podcasting, for analysts, all of it. I think my camera presence is a lot better now than it used to be. So that was really cool for me to realize that fucking up isn't that big of a deal. Saying a stupid thing isn't that big of a deal. It's more about how you react to it. If you make it a big deal on camera and make them, the people watching, think it's a big deal to you, then it becomes a big deal to them. If you say something stupid and you get all awkward and weird after, then those people who are watching it are like, oh, look at him, he's being awkward and weird. Oh, it's awkward and weird now, right? And that's sort of how that happens, and that's fine. But the best way to do it is, and working with Sponge, this is sort of going full circle back to now the finals in Odense. After I think I had learned a lot in my first stage. Second stage, I thought I was way better. I thought I did a way better job on camera. I think I did a better job with my analyst or my analysis, all of it. And then stage 3, working with Sponge, is like, you really realize why this guy is the best of the best when it comes to analysis and working on the desks. He works super hard behind the scenes even. He's watching every round. He's got all these programs. He's breaking things down. He's got stuff ready for in between games where he's doing the stuff on the telestrator. He's works super hard, and his camera presence is unreal. Whenever things happen where things don't go right, or a throw happens wrong, or production kind of fucks something up, he rolls with it so perfectly every time you'd never even notice anything went wrong. And so for me, just even getting to work with him was awesome. And same with Pimp. Pimp is a super funny guy, by the way. Like people tend to hate on Pimp on Reddit, and I get it. People have their preferences. People hate on me. People hate on Sponge. People hate on Pimp. It's fine. I'm not even in their league, honestly, but I think that it's really just working with guys who are so experienced. You learn so much. So I think now when events do come back, it's sort of unlucky for me that was my last event I got to work. I was supposed to work an event in Texas, ended up getting really sick. Maybe I had COVID. I don't know, because it was at the end of December. And I remember I got like super flu-like sick for 2 days, which sucked. And so I couldn't work the event in Texas. I was supposed to be a host. And then Summit that just passed, I was supposed to work that event. There was an ESL event in Denver I was supposed to work in April. That all those things got canceled. And I think I would have actually been so much better at those events than I was even in December at stage 3. I think I gotten so much better and so much more comfortable doing the job. And so it was kind of sad for me that I didn't get to work any events this year because of COVID. But overall, I loved the experience. I thought it was great. I think it's super fun. I think that having a bad analyst desk can, I don't want to say ruin an event, because that's too far. That's putting way too much stock in ourselves as analysts, I think. The game is obviously much more important than the analysts, without a doubt. But I think that having a really good analyst desk can make an event more memorable for the people who are really into the competitive side of it. I think for the average viewer who just goes and clicks, the highlight clips are going to be all they care about. But for the people who really care about the competitive scene, having good analysts and a good analyst desk and people who flow together and know what they're talking about, I think can turn an event from, wow, this event was awesome, to this is my favorite event ever. And same thing with commentators. So all the broadcast talent's super important. And I never used to value it as much as a player. I just sort of thought analysts were annoying. It's like, these guys don't know what they're fucking talking about. And I think now Now, and at that time, the analysts really didn't know what the fuck they were talking about too, right? Because the analysts were just commentators who would just get rotated in as analysts. It's like we have Sadokist being a fucking analyst at like a minor or something. It's like Sadokist is not an analyst. Like, I love Bat, he's not an analyst, you know? So I thought just things like that were funny. So yeah, overall, great experience for me, and I hope I get to keep doing it sooner rather than later whenever all this COVID shit decides to fuck off.
Is there a chance that you would be interested in doing remote work? I've noticed that there's a ton of remote analysts and that sort of thing. So
yeah, the thing is, for analysts, there's not that many remote analysts. There's a lot of remote commentating jobs, right? But not a lot of remote analyst jobs because you don't need to rotate. Like generally for events, let's say they have 4 analysts, even 3 for most events, and you rotate, right? You just sort of rotate them through. For remote stuff, everybody's at home. So if there is an event with analysts, where a lot of events aren't even doing analysts online, if they are doing analysts, you only need 2 guys, right? So I'm not in anybody's top 2, I don't think, which is reasonable and fair. So that's why, for as far as analyst offers go, I haven't really, besides the Summit event, which I did quite a few days for Summit. Besides that, there's just not that much work for analysts remotely right now.
You said earlier you were more interested initially in jumping into the commentary role, but at the time your skill set wasn't suited for it. Would you be interested then in doing some more remote commentator work, but in a sense, maybe you have some plans to do something like the No Flashpoint Club, but as a commentator itself, instead of just the Richard Lewis style spoken word?
I would love that. I've actually reached out to TOs and I've told them, like, listen, you're missing out on an opportunity for a B stream. Just put a bunch of ex-pros on a B stream and just put them, 4 or 5 guys, just like No Majors Club, No Flashpoint Club, whatever it is. Just put broadcast talent, ex-pros, and just have them sit there CS Summit style, right? No Majors Club style, and just have them sit there watching the game and just talking throughout the game. You're missing out on a huge opportunity. And even if you wanted to make it more serious, let's say, than that, and you wanted like a real, because there's also, I personally think there's a market for just an analysts only B stream, right? Where let's say you're watching a game, right? And like, let's say hypothetically at ESL Pro League, you have the 3 analysts, they're in the green room watching the game. You just have them mic'd up, because while we're watching the game at those pro leagues and we're all sitting there watching, we're talking about everything that's happening the whole time. And we're like, oh, look, that was, we need to hit on that point. We need to do this. And I think that even with all these remote games going on right now, I don't think there's any reason not to have the current scene analysts just in a Go TV watching remotely and just doing their thing, just watching like, oh, so look at this happened because of this, and just breaking the game down for people who are really interested in that. It's not going to get as many views as a normal stream, obviously, but I think there's definitely a market for it, and I think a lot of people would want to watch it. So I've reached out to TOs about that. The reality is most of them just aren't that interested in doing it, unfortunately. So then I just asked, just give me the Go TV then. And they're like, no.
Classic. I remember those days.
Yeah. Well, just let me have it. You don't even have to pay me. Just give me the Go TV. I'll do it. It can be an official insert. I was about to say what TO, but just insert any TO here. You don't even have to pay me. I'll just host it. I'll just run the thing. I'll bring in the people. It'll be fine. It'll be a ton of fun. Like, no. But, okay. Fuck.
That's one of the advantages of that co-streaming thing for League of Legends, as far as I understand.
Yeah.
They even get to see the actual stream, and I guess they have the commentary as well, so maybe you could organize something that's a little bit cleaner for
and ECS used to do that, right? Remember back last season of ECS, but now it's Flashpoint, obviously. And maybe when Flashpoint does their new season, maybe they will do something like that. If anyone was going to be open to it, it would be those guys, I think. So I'll have to reach out to the boys over there and see if we can get that organized.
Yeah, I think you know a certain Hawaiian that might be able to let you in, so.
No, fuck, I'm not going to message Alex. Are you kidding me? He wouldn't be able to do shit. Hey, Alex, can you give me the Go TV for the Flashpoint games? Alex be like, okay, let me message Thorin, and then Thorin has to message somebody else. And fuck that, I'll message someone. It's fine. I'll figure it out. Alex doesn't know shit. Fuck Alex, he doesn't know shit.
Fair, I think. Fair and balanced commentary here.
I fucking hate that guy.
I did want to ask, actually, since have you played actually games with Alex, like even in ESE, like pugs or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. I game with, like, I pug with Alex frequently. We played MDL together. Yeah, I play with Alex all the time.
It sort of works as a segue then.
I fucking hate him, though.
I was going to say that
he trolls my pugs.
I was going to ask if there were any current pros, not Alex, unsurprisingly, that you feel playing with them in the past, that you have a little bit more insight now that you're in the analyst role or could be in the analyst role. Were there any examples of this where you had played even briefly with a couple of players? or teammates of those players, and were able to parlay that past experience into better analysis that is sort of unique to your experience?
I think I'm trying to think. There's lots of players who I learned a lot about just like being a better person from, like Arya, for example. I've talked about this so many times in so many different mediums, and whenever anybody asks me about it, I always say Arya, Arya, Arya. I don't think he's necessarily made me like a better analyst. Like, I don't think he's done anything to make my analyst career better by any means, but just being a better person. Like that guy, the stereotypical thing, he'd give you the shirt off his back if you needed it, right? Like that, the stereotypical thing. And, probably literally, to be honest, but he's just a super helpful, nice person. Anybody asks for help, you help them. He's just a fucking great guy. So there's general like life lessons, I guess I learned a lot from him, which I'm sure at least subconsciously make me better on camera, I would think. But I think the main one is Corey, because I remember back in the day, Corey used to he would go in on analysts back in the day. And whenever we were watching back our VODs and we would hear the analysts talk about shit, and he'd be like, they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. They couldn't have known this. Like, look, they're saying that was a dumb play, Jerome, but it wasn't, because I fucking told you to do that. So you just fucking ignore them. You know what I mean? Just shit like that. To remember thinking now, whenever I'm analyzing stuff, I always think about it from, if I was the in-game leader of that team, how would I be responding to this? And obviously, without knowing what actually went on in their comms, you can be like, okay, so this play here, I don't know if this player was being a rogue player or if he was told to do this, but this is a bad play, right? And I make sure like I give that caveat on things so that if the teams are watching it back, they don't think, oh, look at this guy's just putting this player on blast for no reason. They don't even realize that he was told to do that and he's shitting on this guy, and this guy didn't even make the mistake. It was his in-game leader who told him to do this, or a player said he was going to flash and then didn't, shit like that. So I always give the caveat as, we don't know what their comms were, but something went wrong here where this was a terrible decision made by somebody. And I try to give that caveat just to make sure that the people at home know that I'm not, just shitting on somebody for the sake of shitting on somebody. I'm just pointing out the mistake for the sake of learning.
It's a question that's more or less been done to death by this point, but given that you were a former player and now, obviously an on-air talent in this sense, I was wondering if you had any thoughts on how online-only CS stacks up against LAN CS, and maybe you might be able to provide some insight as to how it felt to play online versus LAN as an ex-pro.
Yeah, well, the game, like outside of, I guess we can go with the external factors first. People just aren't as comfortable on LAN as they are at home. Some players are actually more comfortable on LAN than they are at home, right? Everybody's different. I know for me personally, I always felt more in the zone when I was at LAN. I felt like, all right, I'm here now. This is fucking serious now. You know what I mean? Like at home, it's almost easier to be more relaxed and sort of do more things. But at LAN, you're like, all right, this is fucking serious now. Let's go. Lock in. This is time. And then some players get really nervous. I was somebody who I felt like I was almost too dumb to get nervous about things, like to a certain extent. It wasn't not necessarily too dumb, but too confident in myself throughout, like early on in my career. I legitimately thought I was just better than everybody there. So there was nothing to be nervous about. I'm better than them, right? So it didn't matter to me. I don't know if that, obviously it's wrong, especially at the events I was playing at, but it's not something that crossed my mind. I always thought if I'm not better than them now, I'm going to be better than them. And this is just one step to proving it, right? So I think that's one thing, that the actual mental aspect of LAN versus online is players who would normally get nervous on LAN, they don't have to worry about that when everything's online, so they can overperform, let's say. The other thing is for like the actual in-game stuff. The game is just a completely different game. There's no peeker's advantage on LAN. So you can actually hold angles on LAN and get kills, whereas online you cannot. Without NOP, it's really hard to hold angles online if somebody knows where you are, or if you're playing a common angle where they can pre-fire. So those are like the main things. There's obviously a ton of little things like travel. You have to always include travel into it. You never know how far people are going. There's events last year where teams are going from Germany to California to Australia to China to fucking, whatever the hell. So that will obviously take a toll on players' bodies, mentality, practice time. So right now, with everything being online, I feel like teams are actually super well practiced right now. When you watch the teams play, they look like they're really well practiced, and they have set things that they're really banging out well because of how much practice time everybody's got to be getting, because nobody has to travel anywhere. So I think that it's weird because we're almost seeing a really high level of CS tactically from most teams, but then actual performance wise, we're seeing individual performances not the highest, but tactically we're seeing really high level CS. So it's just kind of this weird dynamic that's going on right now with all of this.
Now, do you think that plays into how the analysts or the on-air talent, generally speaking, are conceptualizing the games? Because I also have heard that when you're actually in a stadium as a commentator or as an analyst, and you have a crowd, booming up the sound behind you or around you, depending on where you're seated, it actually feels completely different than if it's piped in crowd noise. Obviously that happened back a couple years back for League of Legends when they were remotely doing some of the NA talent. And of course now there's not even any crowd noise because there is no crowd. So how do you think that plays into the on-air talent side of things?
I think it's probably harder for commentators. I feel like if you're commentating, it's getting hyped up by a crowd can actually really like get you going and make you, do better at your job. I think for analysts, honestly, I don't think it makes that much of a difference personally. I don't think it would for me, especially even the event we did with the crowd. We weren't in the crowd. Like we were in the studio part of the building. We weren't even with the crowd. So honestly, I don't think it would make that much of a difference for me personally. You're just sort of saying what you see and trying to make it as entertaining as possible. So for me, I don't think it would make much of a difference actually for the analysts. For commentators, I think it would, but for analysts, I don't think so.
Well, as an analyst, would knowing that the situation is that it's on a LAN and the players are under this pressure, would that color some of the way that you would deliver your analysis, or would that color some of the things that you might say?
Yeah, you would definitely. It's like I feel like when things are online, I'm kind of torn on it because I almost feel like you need to give the caveat, like you need to remind everybody, hey, just this is online, by the way. Like this guy did great, but this is online. And that's the caveat I would always give as an ex-player because I would just, it's online. So that's how I used to view shit. So, whereas if you're on LAN, you would be talking about the fact that this guy's a fucking clutch player on stage in a final, right? This guy just dropped 30 kills in a final on stage against the best team in the world. Like that's a talking point that you would bring up. That obviously that same talking point you can't bring up when everything's online. So it would definitely change the way you deliver things in the sense of there would be different talking points to me anyways.
As this interview comes to an end, do you have any final words for us, or maybe some teasers for upcoming Peakers Advantage content, or like you said earlier, the YouTube content, anything like that?
No, just subscribe to whatever this channel is. Subscribe to Peakers Advantage, and that's it.
That's all. Man, a few words.
That's all.
All right. Thank you, Davey. Appreciate it.
No problem.